Hello, everybody. My name is Dustin Betts. I'm the digital content editor at the Founder Institute, and I'm here with Emily von Poppering. She's the co-founder of Oddbox. They are a Founder Institute London company that delivers fresh fruit and veggie boxes direct to consumers that can consist of produce with slight imperfections, which helps to reduce food waste. Emily, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dustin.
Yeah, so before we dive into your startup Oddbox, I'd like to hear just a little bit about your own personal story. What were the professional or personal experiences that first led you to founding this social impact company that's focused on food waste?
Yeah, so obviously, as you can hear, I'm not an English speaker originally. I'm originally from northern France, and actually my parents were potato farmers. So I've got a bit of background in there, though I never actually really worked on the farm. But I've got an understanding of what it takes to grow produce. My background is actually more in finance and operations. And before starting Oddbox, I was working as director of finance and operations for a charity focusing on empowerment of adolescent girls.
Awesome. And so I know a little bit about Oddbox, but to preface it for anybody who's not familiar, let's kind of hear it straight from you. We'll dive into all the details. So maybe just kind of your elevator pitch version. What is Oddbox?
Yeah, so we started Oddbox 4 years ago, and the whole purpose behind Oddbox is to tackle food waste and help change consumer behaviors. So the way we do that is by rescuing odd and surplus produce, so produce which either don't meet supermarket specification, so in terms of size, shape, color, or cosmetic defects, or are surplus to requirements. So there's a huge amount of overproduction in the overall system, and that's the kind of produce that we take. So we work directly with growers and fresh produce suppliers, buy this produce at a fair price, and then we make boxes that we deliver to homes and offices. So fruit and veg boxes for homes and fruit boxes for offices. So it's a direct-to-consumer model.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize for people who might not be familiar with this, these figures about supermarket specifications, but it's not necessarily that this food is severely blemished or anything. It's just like the shape is slightly different, right?
Yeah, so in most of the cases, people actually ask us what's different about this produce, because in lots of cases, it's just size. So everything is calibrated in the supermarkets, and actually that's not how it grows in nature. And so on average globally, and that's in all countries, 30% of all food produce is wasted and never reach consumers. And you might not know, but that has a huge impact on the environment. And food waste is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So and it's a huge. It has a huge impact on climate change.
Yeah, that's really, really amazing, because that figure of 30%, I mean, it's just a huge amount of food around the world. So starting from a really, really big place to make that impact. We want to ask you about the challenges that you faced as an impact founder and about how you were able to overcome them basically in building this company. So I guess thinking back to your pre-MVP stages, what were the biggest challenges that you faced in launching Oddbox, and maybe how you went about tackling some of those early challenges?
Yeah, so I think early on, one of the challenge was that I don't actually have a background in produce, so I didn't know anything, and the idea really came from some frustration of going to the supermarket and seeing everything look perfect but not necessarily taste great. And so I kind of started looking into the issue and realized the extent of food which was being wasted. And I knew that myself and friends and other people I knew would be perfectly happy to eat produce which didn't necessarily look perfect but tasted great. And so that's how the idea for Oddbox came about. Some of the key challenges at the start was on the sourcing side as well as on the customer side. So as much as lots of people say the Oddbox was a great idea, then there's it's always tricky to convert people from congratulating you on the idea and then becoming actual customers. So that took quite a lot of time and effort, and we did things like leafleting in our neighborhood, going to local fairs. So really kind of getting the customer is a huge part of kind of getting a business started, and also realizing that actually people are ready to pay for your service. And on the other side, finding the produce. So we knew that there was a huge amount of waste, but then there's a bit of nobody in the sector wants to admit that there's so much waste, and also we didn't have any credentials. So finding suppliers who were happy to work with us was tricky. And when we started, we just needed a few boxes. They were dealing in pallet loads, so we were not really credible. And in addition, we thought we would just be able to call them and get boxes of excess produce that they had, and it doesn't work like that. So the way it works is that they only grow, and then people who want the produce have to deal with all of the logistics. So we ended up having to go to the wholesale market or go to supplier directly to get the produce.
Yeah, that's really, it sounds like really hands-on on all sides. You know, people think of a marketplace or a direct-to-consumer as like I built a website or something, but it's like both on the sales side and on your supply side, you really had to like build a lot of personal relationships and to make that happen. So
yeah. And then also we had to pack all the boxes and deliver the boxes at the end, where we are not really a marketplace. We kind of have to do the logistics work, so it's a very heavy in terms of logistics, going and getting the produce, packing the boxes, and delivering the boxes. And that last mile delivery is what costs a lot of money, and especially in London, where there's a high density of traffic, that was a big challenge.
Yeah, so it sounds like, I mean, from your experience, other advice, I guess just extrapolating this maybe for other founders who are currently pre-MVP, they want to build a social impact business. I know this is a little generic, it sounds of a question, but it sounds like, I mean, your advice is basically like there's a lot that's going on the back end. I mean, you know, there's so much more that you don't see behind. If I go to your website, all of the things that you guys are doing to source, to deliver, to find your customers. Do you have any other generic advice for impact founders who are like in this early pre-MVP stage and just thinking through that, how to go about that?
So I think one of there's an assumption that an impact business needs to do everything right. At the end, it's still a business, and we think about it as it's a triple bottom line, which is people, purpose, but also profit. And to be a business, you need to be financially viable. And so for us, we think about there's the environmental sustainability, but there's also the financial sustainability, which is just as important. And it's being able to balance both. And I'll give you an example. So for example, we still deliver with diesel vans because there's actually no financially viable option for delivering with electric vans unless we charge our customers a huge amount for delivery. And so for us, we didn't feel that that was a compromise on our mission, because there's so many good things that we do in terms of rescuing produce from going to waste that in some ways you have to kind of also think about making your proposition viable for the customer. And if we were charging a huge amount for delivery, we would have no customers.
I love that advice. That's really good advice, because I think, yeah, it can be, especially if you're an impact founder, if your primary motivation maybe coming into it is to do good in the world. Yeah, being able to understand that like an element of a business being sustainable is having that revenue. Yeah, that's really important thing for founders.
And for us, we've always thought that actually the more boxes we sell, the bigger our impact. And so in that sense, there's no compromise between growing fast and our environmental impact. And yes, there's lots of things that we could do better. But for example, in terms of the delivery, the way we've kind of managed that is we started delivering only in one area. We brought density and we deliver only 1 day a week in that area, which means that even though we deliver with diesel vans, the vans don't go all around London, but they go street by street. And so in some ways, we kind of try to minimize our impact without having to compromise on the financial sustainability.
That's amazing. That model of going to by really localizing. I mean, sounds like a really holistic impact. Like you guys are really thinking about this in all different aspects of your business, which is awesome. I want to ask you about delivering a compelling pitch. Now, you already kind of mentioned some of these things, maybe the triple bottom line and just putting the business. It's like it has to have a strong footing, but it's sometimes a lot harder, I think, to deliver a compelling pitch for an impact startup. You might, if you're really tracking metrics, sometimes investors can get confused, like they really want to see that regular bottom line. Do you have any advice for founders in general in how they communicate about a social impact startup to an investor or somebody who's maybe thinking in more financially?
Yeah, so I think there's more and more kind of investors looking at impact businesses, and actually there's the market and consumers want to buy from brands who have a bigger impact than just kind of providing a product. But at the end, I would say investors still need to deliver a return to the fund or to whoever has put the money, and the expectation of return is the same, whether it's an impact investor or whether it's a regular investor. So though they might say that they care about the impact, they also care a lot about the financial return that is provided. But they understand, for example, for Oddbox, they understand that we don't have a business if we don't have an impact, because our customers don't buy fruit and veg, they buy the fact that they can do something good for the planet whenever they receive an Oddbox. And if we lose that part of rescuing produce from going to waste, we actually don't have a business.
Awesome. And so now I want to ask you about how you guys are actually measuring your impact. And I believe you have some kind of dashboard that even lets your customers like conceptualize their impact. Talk a little about how you're measuring it. If it's by waste, if it's by what are the metrics that you guys use to measure food waste impact?
Yes, so we've spent quite a lot of time developing an impact calculator, which because what we've calculated is how much resources it takes to grow the produce. So in terms of water, which is being used to grow the produce, but also in terms of CO2 equivalent. So it's a lot of kind of machinery and kind of labor, and that has a CO2 equivalent value. And so we've translated the produce which goes into the box and each of our box into a water equivalent and the CO2 equivalent. And so, for example, a medium fruit and veg box is the equivalent of 12 showers. So for us, we wanted to make it really meaningful for people, because Oddbox customers want to have an impact on the planet. It's always very difficult to know what that impact means and whether it's better to not take a flight, or whether it's better not to take a shower, but actually it's better to buy an Oddbox than skip your shower.
I love that, because I mean, you sell to consumers. I guess it might be a bit different for a B2B company, but for you who sells to it and your customer is really motivated by like the same things that motivate you, that's really cool that you guys can translate that impact not just on the company but the whole way through to your customer.
Yeah,
I'm sure that,
and it makes it more tangible as well for people to feel that every day they can do something good.
Yeah, So next, I want to ask you kind of about trends. Obviously, you know, COVID-19 has disrupted basically everything in the world, and you know, food supply chains are one of the things that people are starting to talk about. I feel like even more than a couple weeks ago, as the pandemic has kind of dragged on. Are there, you know, food supply chain or consumer trends that you're watching right now? And you know, if so, yeah, what are they? And yeah.
Yes, so there's been a huge kind of acceleration, and for us, in some ways, we've been one of the lucky ones that we're a food business, and we're a D2C business, so we deliver directly to people. So as we're all kind of at home, where people don't really want to go to the store, and they don't feel safe going to the store, and even supermarkets are struggling with delivering. We've seen a huge boom in customer orders. So it's actually accelerating the move to online. So online in the UK, I'm not sure, it might be similar kind of levels in the US, but in the UK, the online grocery market was 7% of the total grocery market pre-COVID. It's now grown over 30%. So now it's 10% of the market. So it's still a relatively small part of the grocery, how people shop for their grocery, but it's been hugely accelerated with COVID. And with that, that means that there's kind of increased competition. But for us, we see it as suddenly the market has increased by over 30%. So there's huge opportunities there. In terms of consumer, so obviously there's been kind of more of a focus on health. So I would say sustainability has taken a slightly setback over the past few weeks, but we see that coming back a lot more strongly. So people realize that flying less, driving less meant skies are so clearer, that there's less pollution. So there's going to be an increased focus on sustainability. And in some ways, all the things that we've been talking about in terms of doing something for climate change, that might be accelerated. There's an increased focus on community as well. So people reconnecting with their community, helping each other. And there's now a bigger expectation from companies and brands that they should do something for the community. And here in the UK, lots of brands, and even we are doing that. So we've always worked with charities, and from the start we've been donating any produce that we had surplus to charity partners, who then redistribute to food banks and soup kitchen. But we are in addition donating some more produce and boxes to key workers and to health workers. So there's an increased expectation that companies and brands contribute to helping the broader community and our health workers. And because people are spending more time at home as well, there's more people cooking. So I think the whole kind of home entertainment, home cooking, there's in the UK we've run out of flour because people are baking a lot more. They are going back to kind of board games and things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of different trends in there, and I believe the UK is a bit higher than the US in the direct-to-consumer, but the same trend is true. Like the acceleration of people who are buying groceries online for the first time it's also growing really, really fast. So yeah, exciting space to be in, and so much to watch. I guess, how do you see food waste changing in the future? I mean, is it a matter of through more direct-to-consumer companies like Oddbox who are able, I guess, how are we going to help eliminate more food waste in the future? And is that, I mean, is it just a continuation of the trends we were already talking about, and having services like yours that are making sure this produce is not wasted? Just thoughts in general about food waste and how we're going to decrease it.
Yeah, so though people are cooking more at home, there's less food waste at home, because in terms of food waste, so overall it's 30% of all of the produce or all the food globally which is wasted. but 50% of that happen in our homes. So it's us buying too much and then wasting the food that we've bought. I thought it would be the opposite and it would drive increased waste at home, but actually people are probably more conscious, and even though they stockpiled, now there's a bit less of the stockpiling, and because they don't go to the store as much, they are more aware of what they have in their fridge, and the volume of food waste at home has decreased. So for us, we see that as unless we change, we educate people and change behavior, we're not going to solve the issue of food waste. So as much as we can rescue produce from farms, if consumers are not aware that there's so much food waste, if they are not given some help with cooking with different types of produce, with conserving food, if they don't put value on the food, then that's where waste happens. And so for example, wasting one banana is 100 liters of water. So when you put it in that context, when people understand what it takes to grow the food that we eat, that it's not just paying 30p for a banana, it's actually kind of a lot of labor, a lot of water, all the transport bringing these bananas from South America. And once we educate people about the food supply chain, then that's only when we can change behaviors.
I love that answer, because it's like there's the solution and then there's the role for the consumer, and it's definitely with food, especially, you know, we all eat it multiple times a day. Like you really have to empower the consumer in order to like get the full range of the impact. I love that. One thing we always like to ask kind of before we wrap up is just, is there anything I forgot to ask you about? Any trends, anything you're watching, something you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
No, I think we've kind of covered quite a lot of what's happening. One thing that has been kind of has come up a lot right now is how much food insecurity there is as well. So as much as there's a lot of food which is wasted, there's a lot of people who can't afford to eat. And even though the UK, like the US, are rich developed countries, there's an increased reliance on food banks. And so there's these two extremes, that there's so much food available and food is quite cheap, but then there's still a lot of people who can't afford to eat healthily. And the fact that schools are closed, at least in the UK, the government was providing free food for children at school. So that's creating major issues for people. The fact that a lot of people are out of job, that they were relying on kind of, a salary that they don't necessarily have savings, will put kind of a lot of people at increased risk of food insecurity.
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities out there for other, you know, founders who are in the food space, because yeah, there's definitely, and it's just being really disrupted. I mean, the food supply chain more than others. Just the types of like produce that went to restaurants. We've been hearing more and more about how it's like different size produce. So yeah, just tons of different challenges out there for founders who want to help come up with solutions in this space. To end, I want to ask you about where Oddbox is heading next. I know you recently closed a funding round, I think of £3 million. Congratulations on that. That's amazing. What's happening next? What's you guys are expanding, or tell us what's coming next?
Yeah, so we're actually only in London, so only in the capital city of the UK. So the team has been working quite hard over the past few months in launching nationwide. So we are going to roll out our nationwide expansion in the next 3 months. So that's kind of the next phase of Oddbox, the geographic expansion. And then who knows, maybe in other European countries later on.
Awesome. Well, that is really, really exciting. We are really, really happy for you. We're so excited to hear about your recent funding round, and we're really looking forward to keeping up with Oddbox. So definitely, keep us in the loop here. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dustin. And I would say it started with the Founder Institute, and that was really what helped me develop the idea and bring that idea to life. So really grateful for having been part of the program as well.
Awesome. Well, we're so proud to see, the impact you guys are having, and all the work you're doing, and the timing of it. It just seems like it's sort of fortuitous. We're just really excited to follow along. So thank you so much, Emily.
Thanks, Dustin.